There is something strangely magnetic about an empty throne. When we look upon a chair of state, carved with symbols, lifted upon steps, gilded with care, or worn down with time, we see more than furniture. We see a space meant to be filled, a presence that is missing, and a story that longs to be told. Thrones are not like other objects. A table or a bed can serve any person, but a throne waits for only one. It is a seat destined for a single figure, a single moment, a single legacy. And when that figure is gone, the throne remains as a silent witness, echoing with whispers that the world has chosen to forget. Across history, the throne has symbolized the union of two realms, the earthly and the divine. To sit upon it was to carry more than one's own weight. It was to bear the hopes, the fears, and the obedience of entire peoples. A king or queen upon their throne could be seen as chosen by heaven, favored by the gods, or at the very least, set apart from the ordinary flow of life. Yet, with all its grandeur, the throne also carried fragility, for the moment the occupant was removed, willingly or by force, the throne became a hollow reminder of impermanence. Consider the contrast. On one hand, we picture the throne of Tutankhamun, encrusted with gold, still gleaming thousands of years after his reign. On the other, we might imagine the thrones of petty kings, whose kingdoms have vanished without record, their seats splintered into dust, their names dissolved into silence. Some thrones remain enshrined in museums, shining beneath glass, visited by thousands of eyes each year. Others lie buried beneath soil, unseen and unremembered, their stories known only to worms and roots, light and darkness, memory and forgetting, grandeur and decay. They meet in the throne more vividly than in almost any other relic of power. And here, in this quiet beginning, we turn our attention toward one such throne, a throne not celebrated in textbooks, not etched in the grand genealogies of dynasties, not even firmly assigned to a name. It belongs to a ruler who is today more absent than present, a king who reigned, whose breath filled the air, whose hand once gripped the staff of authority, yet whose story was all but erased. We call him simply the forgotten king. But what does it mean to forget a king? The very idea feels strange. Monarchs build monuments, command armies, inscribe their names into stone, and fill chronicles with tales of their deeds. They surround themselves with symbols designed to outlast their mortal lives. A throne, above all, is meant to endure. And yet, despite all this, history has a way of turning faces into shadows, voices into silence. The forgotten king once sat upon a seat of power, and today even his throne survives only as a faint whisper, an idea more than an object, a mystery more than a fact. To set the mood, imagine walking through an ancient hall at night. The torches are extinguished, the walls once lined with banners stand bare, dust has settled where courtiers once gathered. At the far end, raised upon steps, there rests a throne. Perhaps it is stone, cracked and weathered, perhaps it is wood, darkened by centuries. Whatever it is, it appears both grand and ghostly. The hall is empty, yet you cannot help but feel the weight of someone who once sat there. The silence hums with absence, and you sense that the throne remembers what people have forgotten. That is the paradox we will explore in this story. History is filled with kings who are remembered too much, tyrants, conquerors, legendary rulers, whose names echo endlessly. But in the margins of time are the others, those whose thrones stand vacant in memory. They ruled, but we do not recall them. They commanded, but we do not know their commands. They lived, and yet history whispers as though they never did. The throne of the forgotten king is not just an object lost in the ruins of time. It is a symbol of everything fragile about human memory. For every ruler celebrated, there are dozens more erased. For every throne polished by historians' hands, there are countless others buried beneath the soil. This throne, silent, patient and enduring, calls us to lean closer, to listen for stories no longer spoken. And so, through this journey, we will not only walk the halls of kings who were remembered, we will seek the shadows, the silences, and the spaces where memory has failed. We will visit thrones across civilizations, Egyptian, Mesopotamian, Chinese, European. And notice how some stand tall while others vanish. We will sift through ruins, broken inscriptions, and missing manuscripts, searching for a trace of the forgotten king. And in doing so, we will explore the delicate boundary between history and mystery, fact and oblivion, light and darkness. The throne whispers because it endures. The man who once sat upon it has dissolved into dust, his deeds dissolved into shadows, yet the throne persists, and by persisting, it calls our attention. Even as it decays, even as its carvings fade, it continues to bear silent witness. It waits for us to wonder, to imagine, to fill the silence with questions. Perhaps in doing so, we give the forgotten king a kind of second life, not in the chronicles of his time, but in the imagination of ours. And this is where our story begins, with a throne, empty yet full, silent yet whispering, forgotten yet unforgettable. When we think of a throne, the mind often wanders to golden halls, marble steps, and a ruler seated in majesty. Yet the story of thrones is not limited to one place, one culture, or one time. From the deserts of Egypt to the river valleys of Mesopotamia, from the mountains of China to the castles of Europe, humanity has always elevated its rulers upon special seats. And in those seats, power took form, ritual found its stage, and history left its marks, sometimes clear, sometimes faint. The earliest thrones were not always gilded or jeweled. In the ancient city-states of Mesopotamia, kings sat upon carved stone or raised platforms, their seats decorated with simple patterns of lions, bulls, or celestial signs. The throne was less about personal comfort and more about cosmic order. To sit upon it was to embody the link between gods and men. Even in their simplicity, these thrones carried the weight of heavens above and earth below. And though fragments of them still survive in ruins, many incomplete, cracked slabs, missing legs, worn carvings, they remind us that time spares nothing, not even the symbols of kings. In Egypt, the throne became a dazzling proclamation of divine kingship. Pharaohs did not merely rule, they were gods in flesh. Their thrones shimmered with gold, inlaid with lapis lazuli, turquoise, and ivory. The seat of Tutankhamun, found in his tomb, still gleams as if the boy king had just left it behind. Its arms shaped like lions, its back panel covered with delicate scenes of the pharaoh and his queen. It is both a work of art and an emblem of eternal power. And yet, for every famous pharaoh whose throne endures, there were countless others whose seats of authority crumbled into dust, forgotten under desert sands. Here again, the contrast emerges, the remembered and the forgotten, side by side. In Greece and Rome, the throne became both a political tool and a stage prop. Emperors of Rome sat upon curule chairs, their ivory legs curved in elegance, signaling authority. The throne was not just a place to sit, but a statement to be seen. When a ruler entered a hall and took his seat upon the curule, it was a reminder to all present: here sat the embodiment of the state, the focus of loyalty, the center of power. And yet, the Roman world also gave us examples of erasure, emperors whose names were chiseled out, whose faces were scratched from stone, whose thrones were left empty as memory recoiled from them. Even here, where the throne stood as a symbol of continuity, forgetting worked quietly. Far to the east, in China, the throne was an axis of heaven and earth. The dragon throne of the emperors was no ordinary seat. It was the very center of the cosmos, the heart of the mandate of heaven. To sit upon it was to claim not only human rule, but cosmic alignment. Richly carved, with dragons spiraling upward, it was as much a mythic seat as a political one. And yet, though the dragon throne remains remembered in legend and preserved in the halls of the Forbidden City, there were emperors who sat upon it briefly, their names fading from memory, their reigns swallowed by dynastic turbulence. Even in the grandeur of China's tradition, forgetting had its shadows. In India, the throne became the peacock throne, a marvel of Mughal artistry, commissioned in the 17th century, encrusted with diamonds, emeralds, sapphires, and rubies. It dazzled all who laid eyes upon it. Poets wrote that it resembled paradise itself, and yet, history was unkind. The peacock throne was plundered, dismantled, and carried off as war's trophy, its pieces scattered across empires, its wholeness forever lost. What once stood as a glittering beacon of imperial might became a symbol of impermanence, a throne of near unimaginable brilliance, and yet today, it lives only in fragments and memory. In Africa too, thrones carried deep spiritual resonance. The Ashanti kings of West Africa ruled from the golden stool, a sacred seat that was said not to be made by human hands, but to have descended from the heavens. It was more than a throne, it was the very soul of the nation. To lose it would mean the destruction of the kingdom itself. Unlike many thrones, it was never meant to be sat upon casually. It was revered, guarded, and treated as divine. And though it survives, the golden stool is less an object of history, and more a living relic, its presence a testament to the unbroken line of memory, yet still shadowed by colonial attempts to seize and desecrate it. Across Europe, thrones took on yet another form, those of medieval and Renaissance kings. The coronation chair of England, for instance, carved in the 13th century, still holds the stone of Scone, upon which Scottish kings were once crowned. Though worn, scratched, and scarred by centuries, it endures as a vessel of tradition. Kings and queens of England sat upon it, binding themselves to a lineage that spanned generations. Yet even here, not every monarch who sat upon it remains remembered. Some are overshadowed, their thrones scarcely mentioned, their names blending into the vast river of history. In each of these examples, a pattern emerges. The throne is never just wood, stone, or metal. It is never just a chair. It is a promise, a performance, a burden, and sometimes a curse. It carries the weight of memory, and the threat of forgetting. Some thrones remain in museums, glowing under artificial light. Others remain buried in ruins, known only by archaeologists' brushes, and still others have vanished completely, leaving only whispers. And this, perhaps, is the greatest contrast of all. For every throne celebrated, preserved, and honored, there are others that are lost. For every remembered king or queen, there are others who have slipped quietly into silence. Power seeks permanence, but time insists on impermanence. Thrones stand at this very crossroads, embodying both grandeur and fragility. By walking through the thrones of civilizations, we begin to sense the outline of the forgotten king's seat. It may have shared the golden splendor of Egypt, the cosmic weight of China, the sacred aura of Africa, or the political sharpness of Rome. Or perhaps it was none of these. Perhaps it was simpler, humbler, yet no less powerful in its day. What unites all thrones is the tension between what they were meant to be and what time has allowed them to become. And so, with the great sweep of civilizations in mind, we return to the whisper of the forgotten. If even the thrones of the most glorious empires can be broken, scattered, or erased, then how much easier is it for a single king's seat to vanish from memory? The forgotten king may not have ruled a vast empire, his throne may not have been gilded with jewels, but it was his. And though the world has chosen silence, the throne itself remembers. History is full of kings, whose names echo through time. Alexander, Ramses, Charlemagne, Qin Shi Huang, rulers whose presence feels almost eternal, carried on the lips of storytellers, and preserved in the ink of scribes. Yet, for every king remembered, there are others who are not. Their names have grown faint, their deeds erased or overlooked, their thrones gathering dust with no one left to claim them. Among these shadows rests the figure we call the forgotten king. But who was he? Was he a ruler of a mighty empire, whose enemies conspired to erase his memory? Or was he a minor monarch, a small figure in the grand stage of history, swept aside by the tide of larger events? The truth is elusive. His existence is like a half-faded painting, outlines visible, colors blurred, details missing. We can sense him, but not hold him. He is both there and not there, present in fragments, absent in certainty. The traces we do have are faint, Perhaps it is a weathered inscription, where the stone has broken away at just the point where his name was carved. Or perhaps it is a line in a chronicle, cut short mid-sentence, where the scribe never finished his work. Maybe it is a legend, told by villagers, in some distant land, speaking of a ruler who vanished, his palace swallowed by the earth. Each clue feels like a whisper, drawing us closer, but never letting us see clearly. To understand the forgotten king, we must first imagine what forgetting truly means. When a king is remembered, he is larger than life. His deeds are repeated in schools, his statues raised in public squares, his throne preserved in cathedrals and museums. But when a king is forgotten, the silence is complete. His people may have cheered his coronation, yet today no one recalls the sound. His armies may have marched in his name, yet today no one knows his victories. He may have built walls, bridges, or palaces, yet today they stand as ruins, with no inscription to link them to his hand. He becomes an empty outline in history, an unnamed presence. Why then would a king slip from memory? There are many possibilities. Some rulers fell victim to what the Romans called damnatio memoriae, the deliberate erasure of a person from all records, their statues smashed, their names chiseled out, their deeds rewritten under another's claim. Others were simply unlucky, their reigns short and unremarkable, ending before chroniclers thought them worth preserving, and sometimes disaster played its part, fires consuming archives, floods washing away cities, wars shattering monuments. A king's story, no matter how grand, can vanish if the fragile thread of memory is broken. Imagine for a moment his coronation, a hall filled with voices, banners waving, the air thick with incense, a throne standing at the center, awaiting its new occupant. The king steps forward, crown placed upon his head, the people cheering his name. For them in that moment, he is the embodiment of power, the source of protection, the figure who will guide their future. Yet now, centuries later, that very name has vanished, the cheers are gone, the throne is silent, and we stand in the ruins, searching for echoes. This forgotten king may have lived in the margins between great empires. Perhaps his land was small, caught between giants whose chronicles drowned out his story. Or perhaps he was one among many rulers in a fragmented age, his authority real to his people, but invisible to history's larger lens. Great kings are remembered, not only because of their deeds, but because of those who recorded them. Without chroniclers, even power fades. Without stone, even crowns crumble. Without memory, even thrones are empty. And yet the mystery of the forgotten king is not just about absence. It is about imagination. Because we do not know his name, we are free to wonder, was he loved by his people, or feared by them? Did he build temples, or lead armies into battle? Did he sit upon a throne of gold, or a simple seat of wood? The silence around him invites us to fill in the gaps, to weave stories where history has left only shadows. In forgetting, paradoxically, he becomes limitless. He could be anyone, anywhere, at any time. His anonymity makes him strangely universal. Perhaps this is why the forgotten king holds such fascination. He reminds us that history is not complete. For every name we recite, there are countless others lost. For every throne displayed in a museum, there are dozens more turned to dust. His story tells us that memory is selective, fragile, and often unjust. But it also tells us that the forgotten can be remembered again, if only in whispers and imagination. Picture then, a traveler wandering through ruins. The stones are silent, the pathways overgrown. In the center of a courtyard, a raised platform stands. The traveler pauses, sensing that once long ago, this was the seat of a king. No inscription remains, no carving survives, no legend lingers, and yet in that moment, the presence is felt. The forgotten king is not truly gone, for the place itself remembers. The throne may be broken, but its whisper endures. This is where the story deepens, for if one king can vanish so completely, how many others have we lost? How many rulers once held sway over valleys, mountains, islands, and cities, now reduced to silence. The forgotten king is not one man, but all men who ruled and were erased. His throne is not one seat, but the symbol of countless thrones, left empty in memory. By seeking him, we seek all those whom history chose not to preserve, and so, as we continue, we carry his shadow with us. The forgotten king becomes our guide through the silence of history. Each ruin we visit, each legend we hear, each broken inscription we study, we will ask, could this be his trace? Could this be his throne? He slips from memory, but in our search he begins to reappear. There is a peculiar silence that hangs over ruins. Walk among the broken walls of an ancient city, and you will hear it, not the silence of emptiness, but the silence of memory. The stones seem to breathe with stories untold, their cracks like sentences half written, their fallen pillars like words scattered in the wind. To archaeologists, ruins are a language. They do not speak in full phrases, but in fragments, just enough to suggest meaning, never enough to complete it. Among these ruins, thrones often appear. Some lie toppled in forgotten halls, their once smooth surfaces eroded by centuries of rain and wind. Others remain upright, still set upon their platforms, though their carvings have worn thin, their inscriptions faint. To see such a throne is to stand at the threshold between the known and the unknown. You can sense the weight of the one who once sat there, but you cannot call him by name. The throne remembers, but it remembers in silence. In the deserts of the Middle East, archaeologists have uncovered stone seats built for rulers who reigned over city-states, now reduced to rubble. Some of these seats are barely recognizable as thrones, just simple blocks raised above the ground, marked by faint symbols. Yet in their time, they were sacred. The king who sat there was believed to channel divine authority. The people who gathered in those halls saw more than a man, they saw order itself embodied. Now all that remains is a cracked stone and the whisper of forgotten rituals. In the Mediterranean world, ruined amphitheaters and palaces still hold chairs of honor reserved for rulers or high priests. One can walk among the stones, brush away the dust, and sit where a monarch once sat. And yet, the feeling is uncanny. For the seat does not remember you, it remembers someone else. Its true occupant is gone, and your presence is only a shadow of his. The throne in its ruin becomes an echo chamber. It holds a memory you cannot hear, though you feel it pressing against you like a faint wind. Perhaps the most haunting thrones are those overgrown by nature. In forgotten jungle cities of Central America, stone seats carved with glyphs sit beneath layers of moss and vines. Birds perch where kings once held court. Roots snake through cracks in the stone, splitting symbols apart. These thrones are more alive now than when they were new, claimed not by kings, but by forests. And yet, even covered in green, they radiate a quiet majesty. You cannot help but feel that someone important once sat there, though his name has been lost. The forest keeps his secret. In Europe, castles crumble on lonely hillsides. Their halls are roofless, their windows broken, their hearths cold, but sometimes, a raised platform remains where a wooden throne once stood. The wood has long since rotted, but the platform endures, a reminder of hierarchy, ceremony, and power. To climb those steps today is to feel both triumph and futility. Triumph because the throne is still there, futility because the man it belonged to is not. Archaeologists, in their patient work, treat these ruins as a language to be deciphered. A faint carving of a lion might suggest strength. A broken inscription might preserve a few syllables of a name. A fragment of gold leaf might suggest former splendor. Piece by piece, they reconstruct the story of a throne. And yet, it is never complete, a sentence without its verb, a name without its face, a story without its ending. The ruins always keep something back, as if guarding the king's memory from full revelation. This perhaps is why ruins captivate us. They are not merely broken stones, they are puzzles. They invite us to imagine, to fill the gaps, to wonder about what cannot be proved. In this sense, ruins are both generous and cruel. Generous because they give us fragments, cruel because they deny us the whole. They let us feel the presence of the forgotten king, but they do not let us know him. Picture yourself standing before such a ruin. The air is still, the sun casts long shadows across the stone. At the far end of the hall, you see the remains of a throne, its armrests chipped, its back broken, its surface rough with age. You approach it slowly, aware that you are standing where countless feet once gathered, where a ruler once raised his voice to command. You lay your hand upon the stone. It is cool, silent, unyielding. You ask it to tell its story, but it remains mute, and yet, somehow, you feel you have heard something, not in words, but in the hush of time. That is the language of ruins. They speak without speaking, they tell without telling. They give us enough to sense, never enough to satisfy. For the forgotten king, this is his legacy. His throne may lie in fragments, but the fragments are enough to remind us that he lived, that he reigned, that he mattered, if only for a while. His silence is not absence, it is a whisper too faint for history, but still present for those who choose to listen. And so we begin to see how the throne of the forgotten king fits into the larger story of ruins. It is not an isolated case, but part of a greater pattern. Thrones across the world, across centuries, across empires, have all been reduced to silence. Some still carry names, others do not. Some still inspire awe, others are barely noticed. But all of them remind us that time does not bow even to kings. The stone may endure, but the story fades. Yet in this fading, there is beauty. For the ruin does not demand certainty. It invites imagination. It does not insist on facts. It allows for wonder. It is this balance, between knowing and not knowing, between remembering and forgetting, that keeps the mystery alive. The throne of the forgotten king may never be fully identified, but in the language of ruins, it still speaks. And we, listening quietly, become part of its story. If ruins are the silent language of stone, then chronicles are the fragile breath of words. They were written with the hope of permanence, with ink pressed into parchment, papyrus, or vellum, to preserve names and deeds beyond the span of a human life. And yet, just like thrones and palaces, chronicles too vanish. Fire, neglect, or deliberate erasure can turn a king's reign into little more than a blank page. History has always depended on those who write it. A king might win battles, build monuments, and hold court over thousands. But if no scribe chose to record his name, or if those records were lost, he slips quietly into silence. The written word, so powerful, is also perilously fragile. A spark can consume a library. A knife can scrape a name from parchment. A flood can dissolve ink into unreadable stains. The chronicles that disappear remind us that memory is not only selective, but vulnerable. In ancient Mesopotamia, scribes carved king lists into clay tablets. Many survive, neatly recording dynasties in ordered succession. But sometimes, gaps appear. Certain names are missing, certain reigns unmentioned. Scholars debate whether these kings were overlooked, erased, or simply forgotten. A dynasty without its missing link is like a necklace with a broken chain. The gap speaks as loudly as the text itself, drawing attention to what has vanished. Was the forgotten king among them, recorded once but left to fade when later scribes chose silence? In Egypt, the practice of erasing memory was deliberate and ruthless. When a pharaoh fell from favor, his cartouche, the royal name carved into stone, could be chiseled away. Statues were smashed, inscriptions defaced, chronicles rewritten. One ruler, Hatshepsut, who reigned as a female pharaoh of great power, was almost erased from history when her successors removed her image and name from monuments. She was remembered only because fragments survived. But what of those whose names were removed completely, with no fragment left? Their thrones once stood in grandeur, but their memory was stolen by the chisels of time. The Roman Empire too practiced damnatio memoria, the condemnation of memory. Emperors deemed unworthy, corrupt, or cursed were struck from the record. Their names scratched from stone, their faces gouged from coins, their achievements reassigned to others. To be condemned in this way was to suffer a second death, the death of memory. And yet, even this erasure is not perfect. The scars on the stone, the blank spaces in inscriptions, the suspicious silences in chronicles, these absences themselves become a kind of presence. We notice the missing, and in noticing, we begin to wonder who has been taken away. But not all disappearance is deliberate. Sometimes it is accident, the slow work of time. In medieval monasteries, monks painstakingly copied chronicles by hand. But when parchment grew scarce, older texts were scraped clean and written over. These palimpsests, as they are called, often hid erased histories beneath newer layers of ink. A forgotten king might survive faintly beneath prayers or sermons, his story buried under words that replaced him. Even today, modern technology sometimes reveals these ghostly undertexts, allowing voices thought silenced to speak again in faint outlines. Fires have been history's greatest thieves. The burning of the Library of Alexandria remains the most famous example, a vast collection of scrolls consumed by flames, erasing untold centuries of knowledge. In China, the Qin dynasty saw the deliberate burning of books that opposed the emperor's vision. In medieval Europe, accidental monastery fires devoured shelves of chronicles, leaving only fragments. Each fire consumed not just paper but memory. Each lost manuscript might have held the name of a king who is now forgotten. Floods and decay have played their part as well. Papyrus crumbles, parchment rots, ink fades, the desert preserves. But the damp destroys. Entire archives have melted into dust, leaving no trace of the rulers once inscribed upon them. What was once carefully written with pride becomes illegible stains. The chronicles disappear, and with them, the kings they once celebrated. And yet, even in this loss, something strange happens. The silence itself becomes meaningful. A dynasty's records might flow smoothly until one reign is missing. A king list might suddenly jump from one ruler to the next, with no mention of the in-between. The absence, the gap, the pause, it tells us that something once existed there, a throne once filled, a name once spoken. The forgotten king lingers not in words, but in their absence. Imagine a manuscript lying in a chest, hidden in a ruined library. Its pages are brittle, its ink faint. You open it carefully, tracing the lines with your eyes. A passage begins to tell of a coronation, a battle, a triumph, but then suddenly, the page ends. The next sheet is gone, torn away centuries ago. You will never know the rest of the story. Was that passage the tale of the forgotten king? Was his name once written there, now lost forever? The silence of the missing page leaves the question unanswered, and yet it makes his presence feel closer. This is the paradox of disappearing chronicles. They rob us of certainty, but they also sharpen mystery. The less we know, the more we wonder. The missing names and erased lines call out more powerfully than the ones preserved. In forgetting, history has created a deeper curiosity, a space for imagination to breathe. The forgotten king may not be written in clear ink, but he survives in the gaps, the silences, the blank spaces where words once were. And so, the throne of the forgotten king is not only an object left in ruins, it is also a name erased from chronicles, a story torn from parchment, a memory burned in fire. To seek him we must read not only the words that survive, but also the words that are missing. We must learn to listen not only to history's voice, but to its silence. Every throne begins with a coronation. It is the moment when power transforms from potential into reality, when a single figure is lifted above the many and declared ruler. The coronation is both spectacle and symbol, a carefully crafted ritual designed to impress loyalty upon subjects, legitimacy upon rivals, and permanence upon time itself. And yet, The coronation of the forgotten king is silent. No record tells us how it happened. No chronicle preserves the hymns or chants. No stone inscription repeats the words of blessing. We must imagine it in fragments, piecing it together from echoes of ceremonies that survived. Picture the scene: a vast hall, whether carved in stone, built of wood, or raised beneath open sky, is filled with gathered voices. Priests, nobles, and warriors line the space, their eyes fixed on the center, where the throne awaits. The air carries the mingled scents of burning incense and trampled earth. Somewhere, musicians play drums and flutes, their rhythms slow and ceremonial. The people wait for the moment when a man will cease to be merely a man and will rise as king. The forgotten king steps forward. Perhaps he was young, with a face still touched by uncertainty. Or perhaps he was seasoned, hardened by campaigns, bearing the scars of survival. We cannot know, but what we do know is that kingship always required a ritual of passage, a moment of transformation witnessed by all. In Egypt, the pharaoh would don the double crown, symbolizing rule over Upper and Lower Egypt. In medieval Europe, the monarch would kneel to receive anointment with sacred oil. In Mesopotamia, kings held scepters and were seated beneath the gaze of carved gods. Every culture shaped the act differently, but the meaning was the same. The man was no longer mortal alone, he was chosen, elevated, and bound to divine order. But here, with our forgotten king, the details vanish. Did priests place a circlet of gold upon his head, or a simple band of iron? Did he sit upon an ancient throne, already worn by generations, or was a new seat carved for him alone? Did the people chant his name, or did silence carry the moment like a sacred hush? History gives us nothing, only the silence remains, inviting us to step into it with imagination. Perhaps the coronation was held at dawn. The rising sun has long symbolized renewal and the beginning of reigns. The first light would have struck the throne, casting shadows behind it while illuminating the king's face. Or perhaps it was at night, beneath torches and stars, where the flickering flames made the ceremony half mystical, half unreal, as though the gods themselves leaned closer to watch. The forgotten king would have taken an oath, for no ruler is crowned without words of binding. Oaths are powerful things. They are the bridge between power and responsibility. I will protect my people. I will honor the gods. I will uphold justice. Every oath is a promise, but every promise also contains the seeds of doubt, the shadow of failure. Did our forgotten king keep his oath, or did he betray it? We cannot know. The silence of the coronation hides not only the words spoken but also the fate that followed. Ceremonies often weave symbols into their fabric. The crown itself, whether of gold, reeds or feathers, is never just decoration. It represents authority encircling the head, power that cannot be removed without consequence. The scepter held in the hand is a sign of command. The throne where the king sits is the axis of the world, the place where earth and heaven meet. Did the forgotten king hold these objects? Were they passed to him with reverence, or was his ceremony humbler, stripped of grandeur, leaving little for memory to preserve? In the crowd, whispers must have stirred. Every coronation is also a test of acceptance. Some voices cheer, but others murmur doubts. A new king always arrives in the shadow of old loyalties, rival claimants, or discontented factions. Perhaps in that moment, someone in the assembly already plotted against him. Perhaps a rival noble clenched his jaw in silence. Even on the day of elevation, the seeds of downfall can be sown. The coronation, for all its splendor, carries within it the inevitability of decline. Yet what lingers most is the sound, or rather the lack of it. A coronation is usually recorded in songs, chants, or inscriptions, but this one has none. The silence is not natural, it is a silence imposed by time, by erasure, by neglect. To imagine it, we must close our eyes and hear what is no longer there: the drums, the voices, the blessing of priests, the declaration of titles. It is a ghostly sound, present in absence. There is something haunting in this unrecorded coronation. Most kings are remembered, at least for the moment of their rise, even if their reign fades. To be forgotten at the very beginning is to carry a unique shadow. It is as if history allowed him the throne, but denied him the memory. He sat, he ruled, and then he was gone, like a candle lit and extinguished before the wax even softened. And so the silent coronation becomes more than just a lost ritual, it becomes a symbol of how fragile beginnings can be. We like to believe that great events will always be remembered, but the forgotten king proves otherwise. Even the most sacred, public, and celebrated of ceremonies can slip through history's grasp. All that is left is the imagination of those who come later, trying to reconstruct a moment whose witnesses are dust. But perhaps this silence is not emptiness. Perhaps it is the most powerful coronation of all because it forces us to step into it, to wonder, to reconstruct. It is not bound to one culture, one ritual, or one set of objects. Instead, it becomes all coronations at once. In the silence, we can see the crowns of Egypt, the anointing oils of Europe, the drums of Africa, the chants of Asia. The forgotten king's coronation becomes universal, a mirror of all beginnings, preserved not in detail but in absence. Thus the throne he sat upon becomes heavier with mystery. His first day as king was also his first day as forgotten. The silence of the coronation does not diminish him, it magnifies the enigma, and it leads us onward toward the next question. If his beginning was so fragile, how was his reign remembered, or not remembered, by the people who lived under him? What shadows did he leave in their lives? What memories lingered when chronicles did not? The silent coronation passes like a dream we cannot fully recall. We awaken with fragments, faces, voices, images, but the sequence escapes us. Still we sense its weight, its importance. The forgotten king was crowned, that much we know. But how, where, and with what words will forever remain a mystery, carried in silence. If history's chronicles forgot the king, perhaps the people did not. For while rulers often leave behind inscriptions and monuments, it is the hearts of the common folk that carry memory in subtler ways. Songs sung in the fields, proverbs whispered by mothers, tales told by firesides, these are as much archives as any library of stone. And yet, when we search for the forgotten king, the voices of the people seem muted, as though their songs were silenced, their stories erased, or their memories reshaped into shadows. Imagine walking through a marketplace in his time. Merchants spread their wares, spices, grain, woven cloth, earthen jars, while voices rise in bargaining. Somewhere, a bard, or storyteller, recites tales to gather coins from passers-by. Would his stories include the new king? Would children mimic his name in games, as children often do when leaders dominate the world around them? Or would his reign have been so fleeting, so indistinct, that their words carried no trace of him at all? The memory of rulers among common people is rarely linear. Some kings are remembered for justice. He was the one who gave us fair weights and honest scales. Others are remembered for cruelty. He raised taxes and left our bellies empty. Still others linger as symbols of prosperity, their names tied to years when harvests were abundant and wars distant. Which of these shadows belonged to the forgotten king? Did the people recall him as a figure of hope, or did his rule blur into the faceless tide of time? Oral memory often reduces rulers to archetypes. A kind king becomes the good one, a tyrant becomes the cruel one. Their actual names fade, replaced by roles. Perhaps the forgotten king lives on in this way, transformed not into a remembered individual, but into a nameless archetype. Somewhere in the distant past, a grandmother might have told her grandchildren, once there was a king who ruled gently, but for a short time. Or perhaps once there was a king who angered the gods, and his name was taken away. Such shadows live longer than names, for they flow through generations without the burden of exact detail. But memory can also be deliberately shaped, or erased. When regimes change, new rulers often rewrite the past. They proclaim themselves saviors, while condemning their predecessors to silence. Temples are rededicated, coins are melted, and songs are forbidden. If the forgotten king fell victim to such erasure, then the people's memory was not merely lost, it was cleansed. Their stories may have been reshaped, to avoid even mentioning him. The absence becomes intentional, an enforced silence that echoes louder than words. Still, silence is not total. Erasure often leaves traces in the margins, a broken carving, its inscription half chiseled away, a folk song that lingers with strange gaps in its verses, a proverb whose meaning seems incomplete, as though the name at its core has been removed. Could it be that such traces of the forgotten king still linger, scattered in the cracks of tradition? Perhaps he exists in fragments, known but unnamed, a presence felt but never spoken aloud. There is a strange kind of immortality in such fragmented memory. A remembered king can be fixed, defined, contained, but a forgotten king, who lingers in shadows, becomes fluid, shifting to fit the imagination of each generation. For some, he may be recalled as a noble figure, wronged by fate. For others, he is a warning about ambition, or a symbol of loss. Shadows are versatile, they change shape, depending on the light, and so the forgotten king lives on, not as fact, but as possibility. Consider too the monuments of stone. Even when chronicles fall silent, buildings remain. If a bridge was built under his reign, people may have crossed it daily without knowing the name of the king who ordered its construction. If a wall was raised, they may have walked beside it, unaware of the royal command that set the stones. Memory, in such cases, becomes detached from the ruler's name. The people live within the legacy without attaching it to a face. Perhaps we ourselves have touched remnants of the forgotten king, pillars, foundations, stones, without realizing whose reign they once marked. What does it mean, then, to be remembered without a name, to be a shadow in memory, rather than a figure in history? It means presence without identity, influence without recognition. The forgotten king may have shaped lives, altered destinies, even carried the weight of an era, but without the anchor of a name, he drifts in collective memory like mist. This is both tragedy and mystery. Tragedy because he is denied the immortality rulers crave, mystery because he is freed from the cage of definition, becoming something larger than a single man. The people's memory is often kinder or harsher than written records. A cruel ruler may still be remembered fondly if harvests were good. A generous king may be cursed in memory if war or famine followed his reign. What balance tilted in the case of the forgotten king? Did his name fade because his reign was unremarkable, leaving no mark strong enough to endure? Or did it vanish precisely because it was too remarkable, too threatening to those who came after? And so we find ourselves circling shadows, reaching for outlines that vanish when touched. The people might have remembered him in whispers, in half-forgotten tales, in unnamed songs, or they may have chosen silence themselves, carrying the unspoken truth that some kings are best left unremembered. The forgotten king lingers in these shadows like a ghost in the collective mind, neither fully present nor fully gone. He survives in the gaps of memory, in the silence between words. And this shadow leads us naturally onward, for if the people's voices could only hold fragments, perhaps the earth itself holds a stronger record. If memory fades in songs and tales, maybe the land remembers more faithfully than the tongue. When the voices of people fall silent, when chronicles crumble into dust, the earth itself becomes the final witness. Soil and stone do not forget, as quickly as men do. Beneath layers of time, the foundations of vanished halls, the fragments of pottery, the worn outlines of pathways remain. They speak in a language older than ink, more patient than memory. To trace the life of the forgotten king, we must listen to this language, the echoes preserved in stone and soil. Archaeologists walk where kingdoms once stood. To the untrained eye, a mound may look like nothing more than a rise in the land, a hill worn by rain and wind. But to those who know how to read the earth, such mounds are archives. A few careful strokes of a brush, a measured cut into the soil, and layers of centuries begin to appear. Each layer tells a story: an age of prosperity, marked by imported ceramics; a season of famine, recorded in brittle grains of charred wheat; a moment of violence captured in broken walls and blackened ash. Could it be that somewhere, hidden under the layers of time, the reign of the forgotten king still lies waiting to be uncovered? Consider how often kings sought to anchor themselves in stone. They ordered temples, fortresses, bridges, and statues. They believed that by binding their names to monuments, they would outlast mortality. And yet, the monuments themselves often endure longer than the names. A temple might still stand, its walls upright, but the inscriptions that bore the king's name may have been chiseled away or eroded by centuries of rain. A bridge might still span a river, though no one recalls who ordered its stones to be placed. In this way, the forgotten king may live on in stone, though his name has slipped away, leaving the monument anonymous. Sometimes, the silence itself becomes a clue. Imagine a sequence of rulers carved into tablets, names flowing one after another, each claiming victories and blessings from the gods. Then suddenly, a gap, a break where one name is missing. The tablets continue after, as if nothing had happened, but that absence whispers louder than any words. It suggests that something, or someone, was deliberately erased. The soil beneath such silence may yet reveal coins without inscriptions, bricks without seals, or buildings stripped of dedication. In these voids, we may find the forgotten king, pottery shards, broken tools, foundations buried beneath streets. These humble fragments speak as much as grand monuments. A jar inscribed with a royal symbol might suggest the spread of his reign. A collapsed wall might hint at battles or rebellions during his rule. Even pollen grains trapped in layers of soil can tell us whether his time saw fertile harvests or years of drought. In this way, the earth becomes a record keeper, impartial and unaltered by the politics of later generations. It remembers what humans wish to forget. Yet archaeology is never without mystery. A fragment can suggest many stories, but it rarely tells one with certainty. A broken tablet, with half a name, was it the forgotten king's? A palace foundation, without inscriptions, was it his seat of power, or another's? Soil may reveal the fact of fire, but not the name of the hand that lit it. We are left with echoes, hints, suggestions. The forgotten king hovers in these fragments, like a ghost, glimpsed but never grasped fully. There is also the question of alignment. Monuments often stand in relation to one another. A temple faces the rising sun, a city gate points to a river, a road leads toward another kingdom. By studying these alignments, we can trace the logic of the rulers who planned them. Perhaps the forgotten king altered such alignments, redirected a trade road, shifted the course of a wall, changed the orientation of a temple. If so, his decisions remain embedded in the landscape, even if his name is not. But perhaps the most haunting aspect of stone and soil is their silence. Unlike chronicles, they do not speak directly, they wait for us to interpret them, to lend them voice. In doing so, we risk projecting our own desires, our own longing for mystery, onto what we find. When we gaze at a weathered stone, and wonder whether it belonged to the forgotten king, we may be seeing not truth, but yearning. And yet, this very yearning is part of the story. For history is not only about what happened, it is also about what we hope might have happened, about the questions that keep us searching. The forgotten king, then, exists in a paradox. He is both absent and present. Absent in that his name, his face, his deeds are lost. Present in that the stones still stand, the soil still holds fragments, the alignments of cities and walls still whisper choices made long ago. To walk through such ruins at dusk, when the light turns golden and the air grows still, is to feel his shadow close by. You cannot see him, cannot call him by name, yet the silence of the stones suggests that someone once stood where you now stand, making choices that shaped the world, and so we arrive at a deeper mystery. If soil and stone can preserve the reign of the forgotten king, what else might they be hiding? What deeper layers of the earth remain untouched, waiting for the day when human hands will uncover them? It may be that his greatest monument still lies buried unseen, a sealed chamber beneath a hill, an inscription hidden inside, collapsed walls, a tomb unrecognized because the name was removed. Perhaps one day, the earth will yield the forgotten king fully, and silence will give way to revelation. Until then, we must accept the echoes, broken, incomplete, but powerful in their suggestion. From shadows in the people's memory, we have followed him into the language of stone and soil, yet the trail does not end here. For even monuments, even fragments of earth, must be interpreted, and to interpret them, we must turn to those who dedicate their lives to this work, the seekers of history, who listen to silence and read fragments like scripture. Thus from the soil, we now move toward the seekers themselves, the historians and archaeologists who chase the ghost of the forgotten king across centuries. History is not simply the study of what happened. It is also the study of what can be known, what must be doubted, and what may never be uncovered. Between the silence of the soil and the whispers of broken chronicles stands the figure of the historian, caught in a perpetual dilemma. To tell the story of the forgotten king, they must assemble fragments into something resembling truth. But truth in history is rarely solid. It is often a fabric woven from uncertainty, conjecture, and fragile evidence. Imagine sitting at a table where the pieces of a puzzle have been scattered. Some pieces are bright and sharp, others are worn and faded, many are missing altogether. The historian must attempt to complete the picture, knowing full well that certain parts will never be found. Yet even the missing spaces must be accounted for, even the silences must be explained. When it comes to the forgotten king, the puzzle becomes even more complex, for it is not only that pieces are missing, it seems that some may have been deliberately hidden, discarded, or reshaped. One historian may argue that the king was real, that his erasure from records points to a deliberate attempt to remove him from memory. Another may argue that he never existed, that what we take for fragments of his reign are mere coincidences of time and ruin. A third may suggest something in between, that he existed, but his role has been exaggerated by our hunger for mystery. In this way, history becomes not a single truth, but a battlefield of interpretations. Each interpretation is shaped by evidence, but also by imagination, by the lens through which the historian peers into the past. The dilemma grows deeper when we consider bias. Every historian writes from within their own world, carrying the assumptions, politics, and cultural understandings of their own time. A scholar from the 19th century, writing under colonial empires, might have seen the forgotten king as a symbol of decay or decline. A modern historian, influenced by post-colonial thought, might instead see him as a figure of resistance, a king erased by those who conquered him. Neither view may be entirely correct, but each reflects the era of the historian as much as it does the era of the king. Then there is the temptation of narrative. Human beings crave stories that make sense, that have beginnings, middles, and ends. Historians are no different. Faced with fragments, they are tempted to weave them into a tale that feels whole. They fill gaps with reasoned guesses, link fragments into patterns, and present them as histories. Yet, as alluring as these stories may be, they are never more than approximations. The forgotten king may appear fully formed in such narratives, but always as a ghost shaped by interpretation rather than as the man himself. We must also reflect on the question of silence. What do historians do with the absence of evidence? Some treat silence as proof that because no record exists, the king must not have existed. Others treat silence as conspiracy, that the lack of evidence suggests erasure, a deliberate effort to hide his presence. The dilemma here is profound. Silence can be read as both absence and presence, denial and confirmation. And so the historian walks a tightrope, uncertain whether to trust the silence or to distrust it entirely. The forgotten king also challenges the discipline of history itself. Historians strive for objectivity, yet the very act of choosing which fragments to study, which interpretations to favor, is subjective. Some may emphasize inscriptions and monuments, others may focus on oral traditions passed down through generations. Still others may rely on comparative study, linking the traces of this king to known rulers in neighboring lands. Each method sheds light, but each also casts shadows, and in those shadows, mystery lingers. Consider too the weight of legacy. A historian who claims to find the forgotten king risks becoming part of the story themselves. Their discovery may bring fame, reshape textbooks, or influence cultural identity, but what if the claim is later disproved? What if the fragments they wove into a king belong to someone else entirely? The desire for recognition can cloud judgment, leading to bold claims built on fragile foundations. In this way, the forgotten king tempts not only the imagination of listeners, but the ambitions of those who study him. And yet in the midst of uncertainty, there is beauty. The historian's dilemma is not a failure, it is the very essence of the craft. For in wrestling with uncertainty, in admitting the limits of knowledge, historians honor the complexity of the past. They remind us that history is not a fixed record, but a living conversation carried across centuries. The forgotten king may remain elusive, but the effort to seek him teaches us as much about ourselves as it does about him. Picture a quiet study, lit by a single lamp. Around the historian are scattered fragments, a coin without a name, a half-broken inscription, a passage from a chronicle that hints at a missing ruler. The historian leans over them, pen in hand, mind racing. They imagine possibilities, test arguments, cross-reference sources. Hours turn to days, days to years. In that silence, they are not merely studying the past, they are communing with it, engaging in a dialogue with shadows. The forgotten king, though voiceless, becomes a partner in that dialogue, challenging them to interpret, to doubt, to reconsider. And so we find ourselves again at the threshold of mystery. The historians, for all their methods, cannot fully restore the forgotten king. They can only sketch outlines, suggest possibilities, offer interpretations. He remains beyond their grasp, yet within their thoughts. The dilemma is eternal, to seek certainty in a world that offers only fragments, to build truth from echoes. From here our journey must turn from the dilemmas of scholars to the broader forces that shape memory itself. For beyond the study rooms and excavation sites lies a vast question: how do societies remember, and why do they choose to forget? It is here in the shifting currents of collective memory that the forgotten king's shadow may finally reveal its fullest shape. Memory is not only a matter of individual minds, it is also a vast collective force, a river flowing through generations, carrying with it stories, names, and images that define who a people are. Yet rivers do not flow evenly. Some streams are preserved in crystal clarity, while others are diverted, forgotten, or allowed to dry. In this ebb and flow of remembrance, we find the forgotten king, suspended, drifting on the edge of oblivion. To speak of memory is to speak of choices. Societies choose what to remember and what to forget, often guided by the needs of the present, rather than the truths of the past. Victories are sung in epic verses, carved into stone monuments, and passed down with pride. Defeats are whispered, if they are spoken of at all, until silence swallows them. Kings who bring prosperity are remembered as golden rulers. Kings who preside over chaos may be erased, their legacies stripped away, their names scratched out as though they never reigned. The forgotten king may have fallen victim to such a process, a ruler whose presence did not serve the narrative of those who came after. Consider the ways memory is shaped in stone. An inscription might be carefully carved into a temple wall, yet centuries later, a new dynasty may chisel it out, replacing it with their own proclamation. A statue may once have stood in a grand square, only to be toppled and shattered when new rulers claim power. Each act of erasure is itself a form of memory, not the preservation of what was, but the preservation of what must no longer be seen. To erase is to remember in reverse, to declare, this shall not be part of the story. In this way, forgetting is never accidental, it is often a deliberate act of power, and yet memory does not vanish entirely. Even as rulers attempt to erase a king, whispers remain: a local song, a village story, a carved symbol hidden on the back of a monument, these quiet echoes resist erasure. They are fragments of shadow memory, existing in margins and corners, carried by those who refuse to forget. In the story of the forgotten king, these shadows may be all that remain, faint impressions that suggest a once living presence, now blurred by time and intention. We must also consider the role of trauma in shaping memory. When a society suffers catastrophe, famine, invasion, civil strife, its stories may bend under the weight of survival. People may choose to forget the pain, burying memories of suffering along with those who ruled during dark times. In this way, the forgotten king could be linked not to glory, but to sorrow. His memory, too heavy to bear, may have been left behind, so that the people could move forward without its burden. To forget is sometimes an act of healing, but forgetting can also be dangerous. A society that forgets too much risks losing its identity, its lessons, its warnings. The forgotten king, if erased for political reasons, may represent more than a lost monarch. He may symbolize the loss of a whole chapter of history, a warning silenced, a story cut short. Without memory, mistakes repeat, patterns resurface, and the ghosts of the past return unrecognized. In this sense, the forgotten king's absence is not just a mystery, it is a mirror reflecting the fragility of memory itself. Think of how memory lives in ritual, annual festivals, sacred chants, processions through old streets. These are all vessels of memory. If a king is absent from them, if his name is missing from the litany of ancestors, then he is doubly forgotten, erased not only from stone, but from the living cycle of remembrance. Yet if even one ritual retains a trace of him, a song with his name, a gesture whose origin has been obscured, then the shadow of memory persists, keeping him alive in ways that defy erasure. The shadows of memory also dwell in language. Words themselves can preserve what records erase. A place name may carry within it the echo of a king's title, even if the story is lost. A proverb may contain the essence of a ruler's decision, reshaped into timeless wisdom. Over generations the king disappears, but his influence lingers in the very fabric of speech, hidden in plain sight. The forgotten king may live on not in history books, but in the phrases spoken daily by people unaware of their origin. We cannot ignore the role of storytellers, the bards, the chroniclers, the keepers of law. They decide what enters the current of memory, and what drifts into shadow. Some may have chosen to silence the forgotten king, whether by command or by preference. Others may have kept him alive in coded tales, disguising his story beneath allegory or myth. To read ancient stories is to trace these hidden currents, searching for the shadow of a king who once stood in the light. And what of us now? In our act of searching, in our curiosity about the forgotten king, we ourselves become part of this cycle of memory. By asking questions, by imagining his reign, we resist the erasure, we add new layers to his shadow, weaving him back into the flow of thought, even if only in speculation. Memory, after all, is not only about certainty, it is also about the desire to hold on, to prevent complete disappearance. To speak the phrase, the forgotten king is all ready to remember, all ready to give shape to what others sought to hide. From here the question grows larger. If memory is shaped not only by what is preserved, but also by what is deliberately lost, then what role do myths play? Myths often arise where history has gaps, filling silence with story, shaping shadows into form. Could it be that the forgotten king lives on most strongly not in chronicles, but in legend, half history, half poetry, dwelling in the twilight, between memory and imagination? This is where our path now leads, away from the scholars' debates and the politics of remembrance, into the realm of myth itself. For myths, unlike histories, do not vanish with erasure, they transform, adapt, and survive. And perhaps in those enduring tales, the forgotten king has never truly been lost. History may bend, records may vanish, and rulers may attempt to silence the past. But myths are stubborn. They endure not because they are carved in stone or inked on parchment, but because they are whispered, sung, and retold in the quiet places where power cannot reach. Myths move like the wind, shifting shape, adapting to new ears, yet carrying within them the seeds of older truths. And when history has been stripped away, when the name of a king is erased, it is often myth that refuses to let go. The forgotten king may be absent from the official annals of his realm, but perhaps he lingers in legend, a figure in a fireside tale, a hero or a villain, cloaked in allegory. His story could have traveled across generations, disguised in the clothing of myth. Where historians fall silent, storytellers take over. They keep the embers of memory glowing, even if the form of the story changes beyond recognition. In many cultures, we find echoes of rulers who blurred into myth. A king who vanishes in battle becomes remembered as one who sleeps beneath the mountain, destined to return when his people need him. A ruler who brought cruelty may become the monster in children's cautionary tales, his deeds exaggerated but never forgotten. A monarch who died in mysterious circumstances may be reborn as a folk spirit, haunting rivers or guarding ruined cities. Perhaps the forgotten king followed this same path, leaving behind no crown in the chronicles, but instead a lingering shadow in legend. Consider the persistence of oral storytelling. Even when conquerors destroyed libraries, when temples burned, and when scripts faded into dust, people still gathered around fires, in markets, in households, and shared stories. Words spoken aloud cannot be erased so easily. They cling to the air, take root in imagination, and travel across distances. A grandmother's lullaby, a bard's song, a ritual chant, each may hold fragments of a king whose history was forbidden, but whose memory was too stubborn to die. In these legends, truth and invention are woven together. A story may begin with a kernel of reality, the reign of a king, the fall of a city, the betrayal of allies. Over time, that kernel sprouts into branches of fantasy, dragons, curses, divine punishment, miraculous returns. Yet, if one listens carefully, one may hear the faint echo of fact within the fiction. The forgotten king's reign may be hidden in this way, obscured by layers of tale, but never completely extinguished. Sometimes legends preserve more than they distort. Archaeologists have found cities once believed to be only mythical. Troy, long dismissed as a story from Homer, was uncovered in the earth. The flood narratives of countless cultures, long thought to be pure fable, reflect real cataclysms from ancient memory. Might the forgotten king be like this too, hidden not in the ground, but in the persistence of his legend? What the historians chose to bury, the storytellers may have secretly preserved. It is worth noting that legends rarely travel alone. They mingle with one another, merge with neighboring stories, and take on local colors. If a tale of a mysterious king appears in one land, and a similar tale appears in another, perhaps they are both fragments of the same lost ruler, scattered by time and retold in different tongues. The forgotten king may not appear as himself in legend, but as many faces: hero, tyrant, trickster, savior, all pointing back to the same erased figure. We must also ask why legends survive when records perish. The answer lies in human need. Stories that comfort, stories that warn, stories that inspire, they endure because people need them. A king who fought bravely, but was betrayed, may live on as a figure of loyalty. A king who brought cruelty may linger as a reminder of what must never return. Myths survive because they serve, and in serving, they grant immortality. In the story of the forgotten king, perhaps the throne remains empty in the chronicles, because the rulers who followed wished to claim his glory or bury his shame. Yet among the people, the stories resisted. They remembered a king who walked the earth in their grandparents' time, and they passed the story along until it grew wings of myth. And though scholars may dismiss these tales as fantasy, they may contain the only surviving trace of his reign. Even now, in remote villages, forgotten ruins, or fading songs, the legend of such a figure may still live, a chant sung during harvest that recalls a sleeping king. A story of a monarch cursed for breaking sacred laws, a whispered tale of a ruler who vanished into the sea, destined to rise again. These fragments may seem small, but together they create a constellation of memory, and constellations, like legends, guide the lost through darkness. The persistence of legend is in itself an act of defiance. Where history books are written by the powerful, legends belong to the people. They are a way of remembering what cannot be said aloud, of ensuring that erasure is never complete. The forgotten king may have been removed from his throne in the chronicles, but in the realm of legend, he continues to reign, if not as a man of fact, then as a figure of eternal story. And so we stand at a threshold. We have traced the erasures of history, the silences of chronicles, the shadows of memory. Now, as we enter the realm of myth, we find the forgotten king not as he was, but as he has become a figure larger than life, woven into story, preserved not by stone but by imagination. Legends that refuse to die remind us that history is never fully lost, it only changes form. When the voices of history fall silent, the earth itself often speaks. Stones, broken walls, and ruins carry with them an unspoken memory, a quiet testimony to lives once lived, to rulers once enthroned. For the forgotten king, whose name may be missing from chronicles, and whose deeds may have dissolved into legend, it is perhaps the ruins that preserve his truest shadow. A shattered palace, a crumbling throne, or a desolate city may hold more truth than the most carefully written scroll. There is a stillness to ruins that resists erasure. Unlike ink, they cannot be scraped away. Unlike words, they cannot be forbidden. They linger in silence, weathered by centuries, yet unwilling to vanish entirely. Each stone bears the imprint of hands that once placed it. Each wall holds the faint echo of footsteps. Each broken arch carries the memory of ceremonies now forgotten. The ruins of a kingdom may be the last sanctuary of a king, whom history sought to erase. Across the world, we see this pattern repeated. Civilizations rise and fall, their rulers remembered for a time, and then gradually, sometimes suddenly, forgotten. Yet, the ruins remain. The silent avenues of once great cities, the worn stairways leading to collapsed temples, the fragments of statues with their faces eroded by wind. Each fragment whispers of someone who commanded, someone who dreamed, someone who ruled. A forgotten king may no longer live in the stories of men, but he is still there, hidden in the stones that refuse to die. There is a strange poetry in ruins. They are both absence and presence, both loss and survival. They remind us that something has ended, yet they also remind us that something endures. A toppled throne, cracked and weather-worn, may speak more eloquently about impermanence than any surviving crown. And perhaps this is where the forgotten king resides, in the lesson that power crumbles, that glory is fleeting, that even the strongest walls eventually bow to time. Archaeologists, who walk among ruins, often describe a sensation beyond mere study. It is a feeling of being watched, of walking among ghosts. In a deserted palace courtyard, one can almost hear the distant hum of voices, the rustle of silk garments, the murmur of ceremonies. The mind supplies what the eyes cannot see. And in that space between imagination and stone, the forgotten king lives once more, not as a clearly defined figure, but as a haunting presence, a sense that here, once there was rule. What do ruins tell us of their masters? Sometimes grandeur, vast pillars that stretch toward the sky, walls decorated with carvings of divine kingship, thrones fashioned from rare stone. Sometimes they speak of tragedy, burned timbers, collapsed ceilings, fortifications that failed in a final battle. In both we sense the outline of a ruler who once sat in command. For the forgotten king, perhaps his greatest biography is written not in words, but in the silent language of ruins. There is also mystery in how ruins are rediscovered. Entire cities have slept beneath jungles, deserts, or rivers, waiting centuries to reveal themselves. Angkor beneath the roots of Cambodian forests, Machu Picchu, high in the mountains of Peru, Babylon, under layers of sand. Their kings, often half remembered, half mythical, come back into focus when the ruins are unearthed. And so it may be with the forgotten king. Somewhere beneath vines or sands, his throne may still wait, cracked but not gone, ready to remind us that he lived. But ruins are not only physical, they also live in memory, in cultural fragments that persist even when the city has crumbled. A forgotten king's palace may be lost, but a local ritual may still echo the ceremonies once performed there. A ruined wall may stand silent, but nearby villages may tell stories of a king who vanished into the earth. These intangible ruins, songs, customs, fragments of story, are just as enduring as the broken stones. Together, they form the scattered remnants of a reign, erased yet not destroyed. What is most haunting about ruins is their silence. They do not argue, they do not boast, they do not proclaim, they wait. They wait for the curious gaze, for the attentive ear, for the moment when someone stands among them and wonders, who lived here, who ruled, who built. In that wondering, the forgotten king rises again, if only for a moment. Each visitor becomes a participant in his remembrance, each question a spark of resurrection. And yet, ruins also conceal. For every clue they reveal, they withhold another. A palace may show its outline, but not its occupant's name. A throne may remain, but the crown it once held may be gone. We are left piecing together fragments, weaving threads of imagination through gaps of silence. The forgotten king is there, but only as a shadow, only as a suggestion. Perhaps that is fitting. His name was taken from history, and so he dwells in half-light, glimpsed but never fully seen. There is something profoundly human in this. All kings, no matter how powerful, eventually become ruins. Their palaces turn to dust, their statues weather into faceless stone, their names fade, and yet, paradoxically, it is in their ruins that they achieve a strange kind of immortality. The forgotten king may never be found in history books, but in the silent dignity of ruins, he endures, haunting, reminding, teaching. As the night deepens, and we walk among these imagined ruins, we feel both awe and melancholy. We see the grandeur that once was, the silence that now reigns, and we understand the king may be forgotten, but the ruins ensure he is never entirely lost. Stones may crumble, but they crumble slowly, and in that slow collapse, they carry forward the memory of the one who once sat upon the throne. Though centuries have passed, and his name has slipped away from the scrolls, the forgotten king has not vanished entirely. Like a voice carried faintly on the wind, his presence can still be felt in small echoes that reach into the modern world. These echoes do not appear in royal decrees or carved monuments alone, but in the quiet corners of culture, in traditions, and even in the imagination of those who live near the ruins of his realm. In villages that border ancient sites, stories still circulate. They may not name the king directly, yet they speak of a mighty ruler who once held the land, who built palaces now swallowed by earth, or who vanished under mysterious circumstances. Such tales are often told to children at night, in the glow of firelight, passed down not as history, but as legend. These oral traditions, fragile as whispers, act as vessels, carrying faint memories of the forgotten throne. We also see the king's shadow in architecture. A doorway here, an unusual carving there, features that resemble no current style, but point to something older, something inherited. Many ancient builders left their mark, not in grand monuments alone, but in subtle designs woven into everyday structures. A lintel pattern, a wall of dressed stone, or a motif repeated across temples, may all bear the distant signature of a ruler whose influence lingers beyond memory. Even when unnamed, his aesthetic vision remains etched into the landscape. Symbols are another form of survival. Coins, seals, and small ornaments sometimes outlast the palaces of their makers. In markets and museums, archaeologists and collectors stumble upon strange insignias, a crown-shaped emblem, a half-faded royal mark, or an animal once sacred to a king's dynasty. Though their meaning is often debated, they stand as enduring fragments of authority, tiny relics that remind us of a reign erased but not entirely gone. Sometimes the echoes surface not in stone or artifact, but in belief. Rituals carried on for centuries, often stripped of their origins, may contain elements once tied to the forgotten king. A seasonal festival, celebrating harvest or victory, may once have been part of his courtly ceremonies. Over time, the connection dissolved, yet the practice endured, like an old song sung without knowledge of its composer. In this way, the king lives on, not remembered directly, but woven into rhythms of life that outlast his kingdom. There is also a curious tendency in modern politics and identity to reclaim forgotten rulers. Nations and communities often search their past for figures who symbolize strength, unity, or mystery. A half-lost king, barely known but surrounded by aura, becomes fertile ground for rediscovery. His name may be invoked in speeches, his supposed deeds resurrected in monuments or novels. The forgotten king becomes a mirror for contemporary hopes, used to anchor present struggles in the dignity of an ancient past. The echo extends into art as well. Painters, writers, and filmmakers frequently draw inspiration from fragments of history. A ruined throne, or half-buried city, may inspire entire works of imagination. The forgotten king may reappear in literature as a tragic figure, in films as a mysterious monarch, or in music as a symbol of impermanence. Artists, like archaeologists, piece together shadows and silence into forms that breathe again. In this sense, his story continues to unfold, not as truth, but as myth, shaping modern creativity. Even for those who never hear his name, the influence of the forgotten king lies hidden in the quiet knowledge that there were rulers before us, civilizations that thrived and fell, kings whose crowns now rest beneath dust. This awareness, subtle and unspoken, colors how we think about history and ourselves. We are reminded that greatness can fade, that memory is fragile, and that even forgotten figures leave traces we cannot fully erase. And so in the modern world, the king endures not as a man of flesh, not even as a clear name, but as an echo. His presence is diffused across stories, symbols, traditions, and imagination. He lingers in the rhythm of daily rituals, in the patterns of old stone, in the whispers of villagers, in the pens of artists. Though he was meant to be forgotten, the world has remembered him in fragments, scattered and incomplete, yet strangely persistent. The throne may be empty, the palace a ruin, but the echo travels still, and as long as people wonder, imagine, or dream of who he was, the forgotten king remains alive, not in history, but in the curious space between memory and myth. History, when examined closely, often speaks less through dates and battles than through silence. The story of the forgotten king is not merely about what happened to him, or why his throne crumbled into dust. It is about the lessons that emerge when we peer into the void left behind, when we confront the unsettling truth that memory itself can betray greatness. In his disappearance, there are teachings, subtle yet profound, about power, impermanence, and the fragile thread that connects us to the past. One of the first lessons, whispered by the forgotten throne, is the fleeting nature of authority. A crown may gleam brightly for a time, but it is no more permanent than the metal it is forged from. Kings rule with pomp, believing their names eternal, yet history reveals that even the most powerful can be erased. The king we seek once commanded armies, oversaw palaces, and bent nations to his will, yet today, his identity is blurred, his name absent from familiar chronicles. His life reminds us that power, however absolute in its moment, is vulnerable to the erosion of centuries. Another lesson emerges in the fragility of memory. Civilizations invest immense effort in preserving their stories, carving them into stone, etching them into manuscripts, and painting them on walls. Yet time, nature, and human conflict erode these efforts. Fire consumes archives, invaders desecrate temples, languages die, and the continuity of remembrance breaks. The forgotten king teaches us that memory is not a guarantee, it is a fragile inheritance that requires constant tending, otherwise, even those who seemed unshakable may fade into obscurity. There is also a more intimate teaching, the idea that greatness lies not only in recognition, but in influence. The forgotten king, though unnamed, left behind architectural styles, traditions, and whispers that shaped those who followed. His legacy survived, not in the brilliance of his name, but in the quiet persistence of what he set in motion. It suggests that true impact is not measured by glory alone, but by how deeply one's actions ripple through time, sometimes invisibly. The throne of the forgotten king also calls attention to humility. For modern listeners, there is a tendency to imagine permanence in our own lives, our achievements, our creations, our societies. Yet the silence surrounding this ruler warns us otherwise. Just as he was once celebrated, we too may one day be reduced to fragments, our grandest monuments crumbled into ruins. This awareness does not diminish life, rather it deepens it, urging us to live with reverence, kindness, and care, knowing that fame is fleeting, but humanity endures in the memory of small, meaningful acts. A further lesson lies in the power of mystery itself. The king's obscurity, far from erasing his significance, has amplified it. Because he is forgotten, he compels us to search. Because he is absent, he ignites our imagination. This paradox teaches us that mystery holds a kind of energy, one that keeps the past alive, not through certainty, but through wonder. Sometimes, forgetting is not an end, but a transformation, turning a ruler into a timeless figure of curiosity, a puzzle that will never truly be solved. The forgotten throne also illustrates the cycle of rise and fall that governs all of history. Empires ascend, flourish, and decay. Just as seasons turn and rivers shift their course, the king's reign was once a peak in this cycle, yet it inevitably gave way to decline. His throne reminds us that nothing is fixed, no matter how grand it appears. Kingdoms, like individuals, are subject to the laws of impermanence. In understanding this, we are invited not to cling too tightly to power or success, but to embrace the rhythm of change as a natural part of existence. There is another subtler teaching hidden here: the importance of stories themselves. Without them, kings vanish. With them, even ordinary people can live forever. The forgotten king demonstrates the delicate balance between history and myth. He is gone, in fact, but alive in imagination. His throne shows us that humans are not sustained by records alone, but by the act of storytelling, by the voices that carry tales across generations, reshaping them, giving them life anew. In this way, remembrance becomes a collective art, not a fixed archive. The silence surrounding the throne also urges reflection on justice and legacy. Was the king forgotten because he failed his people? Was his memory erased deliberately, as punishment, or as cleansing, or was it simply the passing of time? The uncertainty prompts us to consider our own actions. What kind of legacy do we leave? What do we wish to be remembered for? The forgotten king's erasure becomes a mirror, reflecting not only his fate, but our own questions about mortality, morality, and meaning. And perhaps the greatest lesson is this: that forgetting is not always loss. In his vanishing, the king has transcended the limits of biography. He is no longer confined to a single name, a single dynasty, a single record. He has become a universal symbol of time's silence, of history's shadows, of the mystery that lies between knowing and unknowing. His forgotten throne is in itself a reminder that some stories live longest when they are incomplete, when they leave space for wonder. Thus, from the dust of his ruins, we learn; from the silence of his name, we reflect; from the fragments of his reign, we are reminded of our own place within the vast impermanent sweep of history. The forgotten king may be nameless, but he is not meaningless. His throne, empty though it may be, still speaks softly, patiently, as though inviting us not merely to look backward, but to live forward with deeper awareness. In the end, the forgotten throne is not about loss, but about perspective. It tells us that power fades, but influence lingers, that memory is fragile, but mystery is enduring, that even when history is erased, meaning can still be found in what remains. And so when we close the book on his story, we do not close it in despair, but in wonder, grateful for the lessons that emerge from silence, and for the way forgotten kings can still teach us to remember. As the final embers of our journey begin to settle, let us pause, and imagine ourselves seated before a quiet fire. Its glow is steady, its warmth gentle, casting long shadows across the floor. The world outside is dark and hushed, and in this cocoon of stillness, we look back upon the path we have traveled together, the search for the throne of the forgotten king, the ruins we wandered through, the mysteries we pondered, and the lessons whispered to us through silence. The throne, once gleaming with power, now stands as a symbol of impermanence. We have traced its story through fragments of history, through whispers of legend, and through the faint echoes that linger in memory. Yet what remains with us most vividly is not certainty, but a quiet awareness that everything, no matter how magnificent, eventually yields to time. This awareness does not leave us with sorrow, but with a serene acceptance. For in impermanence, there is a strange beauty, much like the flickering fire that warms us now, bright for a moment, then fading into gentle smoke. The forgotten king, whoever he was, becomes more than a historical figure in this reflection. He becomes a mirror of all who came before, and all who will come after. His silence is not empty, it is filled with meaning, inviting us to look within ourselves. For just as he once sat upon a throne, believing his reign to be eternal, we too carry hopes, dreams, and legacies we wish to last forever. And yet, like him, we are reminded that what truly endures is not our titles or possessions, but the impact we leave upon others, and the way our actions ripple through time. As the firelight dances, one might think of the countless rulers, builders, and dreamers who once stood tall and proud, only to fade into the quiet recesses of history. Their palaces lie in ruins, their names forgotten, their monuments weathered by storms. Yet their lives were not meaningless, for even in their fading, they contribute to the vast story of humanity, a story that binds us together across centuries, across cultures, across the fragile thread of time. The forgotten king is but one chapter, but through him we see the whole book more clearly. There is also comfort in the mystery. We do not know his name, we cannot trace every detail of his life, and yet that very absence compels us to imagine, to wonder, to keep the story alive in our own way. If every question had been answered, perhaps the tale would lose its magic, but in his silence, the king endures, not as a relic of certainty, but as a spark of imagination that will never be extinguished. It is as though forgetting gave him a second life, not in the annals of historians, but in the hearts of those who wonder. In this quiet moment, another thought rises. Perhaps forgetting is not always a curse. Perhaps it is part of the natural order, just as night follows day and seasons turn. The forgotten king's throne teaches us to let go, to accept that not all will be remembered, and not all must be remembered. Life is fleeting, but it is in its fleetingness that it becomes precious. Just as the firewood burns only once, casting its light before becoming ash, so too do our days hold meaning, because they are limited. And yet, even as the king fades, his throne, whether real or symbolic, remains a guidepost. It calls us to humility, reminding us not to chase permanence, but to live fully in the present. It calls us to kindness, for what endures beyond memory is the way we touch the lives of others. And it calls us to wonder, for mystery itself may be the greatest gift history can give us. As we sit with these reflections, the fire before us grows quieter, its flames diminish to glowing coals, warm but fading. Outside, the night deepens, the air cools, and the stars above remind us that while kings rise and fall, the cosmos endures, vast and eternal. Against such a backdrop, our lives may feel small, but they are also part of something infinite. Like the forgotten king, we are threads in a grand, unending tapestry. So let us leave his throne, not with sadness, but with gratitude, gratitude for the questions it stirred within us, for the silence that made us listen more closely, and for the timeless reminder that history is not only about remembering names, but about cherishing the lessons carried forward through shadows. And now, as the last glow of the fire softens into ash, let us rest. The journey is complete, the story told, the throne acknowledged. Somewhere in the hush of ruins, or in the depths of memory, the forgotten king remains seated, not in power, but in mystery, eternal in his silence. Close your eyes, breathe deeply, and carry with you the calm awareness that even what is forgotten can still speak, and even what fades can still illuminate the night. The throne may be empty, but its presence is everlasting.